Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to another video. In this video, I'm going to be restoring this mahogany piece that I got off Facebook Marketplace that, if I remember correctly, I think it was $250 for this piece and another piece that I got, which will be the subject of my next video. This piece was made by Kling, which is a company I've never heard before, but apparently they make really good furniture because this is completely solid mahogany. And one really strange thing is that there is absolutely no finish. And I mean literally no finish on it. It's all raw wood, which is pretty strange. The back panel I just pulled off because it was barely being held on. It fell apart in my hands pretty much. And I'm not crazy about this hardware at all. I'm not a fan of the Batwing style handles, so I'm going to be replacing those. The drawers weren't in terrible shape, but they were pretty dirty. They had cobwebs in them. There was dirt and dust. This drawer was missing its drawer dividers. You can see it has those little slots on the side for them. It was missing those, and it was also missing its drawer guide, along with the other top drawer. We got some nails in the dovetails, which drives me a little nuts, and a couple corners of the drawers need fixing. Now, I did a little research on Kling and found out that it was actually established in 1911, and they were mostly known for making long-lasting quality furniture. It was founded by John A. Kling, who was a Swedish immigrant, and the company was based out of Mayville, New York. So with all that being said, join me on this transformation as I take this old dusty dirty piece and turn it into something beautiful. Hope you enjoy the video. Now normally I would usually start by taking off all the hardware, but this piece was so dirty I just wanted to get into cleaning. Now remember, we always want to clean our furniture before we go in with sanding, because we don't want to grind all of that dirt and debris down into the wood fibers and inhibit our finish from adhering correctly. And you could see how dirty this piece actually was. Now I'm just going in and taking off all the hardware. And I'm going to keep these poles, even though I'm not going to be using them for this piece again. I'm just going to keep them just in case I, can use them for something else in the future. Now I'm just taking out all the drawers because I need to get inside of the frame of the piece to be able to get to those wood panels that separate all the drawers. And as you can see, aside from a few cobwebs, the panels look pretty rippled and warped. You can see I'm just pushing down with a couple fingers here and I'm pretty much going straight through them. So those are definitely going to have to be replaced. But in the meantime, I'm just going to give the carcass itself here a pretty good vacuuming and cleaning. And once I'm done with that, I'm just going to take my hammer here and I'm going to start removing those panels. I was trying to be as careful as I could, but I broke off a little piece on the frame, but no worries, I'll fix that. Now I'm just gluing up that little piece that I broke off. And remember, when you're using your finger to glue something up, you want to make sure your fingers are nice and clean because the oils from your skin, if they're dirty, can interfere with the bonding. And I'm just clamping that up to get some good pressure on there. Now I could have started at a higher grit because there was absolutely no finish on this piece, but there are a bunch of scratches, so I do want to get those out, which I am able to do because this is solid wood and not a veneer. If this was a veneer and I tried to get those scratches out by sanding through them, I would burn right through that veneer. So it's really good to know what you're working with. And I think for this piece, I'm going to be sanding to 1000 grit, which will be the top and the draw faces. And then I think I'm going to do 320 for the rest of the piece. So this piece is going to have a beautiful shine to it when I'm finished. And just a couple tips for anybody who's new to sanding. When you're sanding, you really want to hold the sander flat, level with the surface you're sanding. You don't want to put too much pressure. You want to put maybe just a little bit, but you really want to let the sander do all the work. You don't want to move too fast for the sander. It's recommended that you move about an inch per second. Make sure that the surface that you're sanding is nice and clean and there's no debris or leftover sanding dust from the last sanding that you just did. And make sure that you're moving up in grits correctly. So for example, this piece I'm going up to 1,000 grit. So I would start at 180, then move to 220, then 320, 400, 600, 800, and then finally 1,000 grit. So I hope that's helpful. This piece of board had a little hairline crack in it, so I'm just making it a little bit bigger so I could fit my glue down into there. Adding a little bit of glue, and then with my finger I'm just going to push some of that glue down into the crack, and then just clamp it up. There are a few stains on this piece, and I don't really want to sand them out because it'll take forever. So I'm just going to use some oxalic acid. And if you remember from my first video, oxalic acid is basically just a wood bleach. And you're going to want to add some to hot water and just mix it up until it stops absorbing, and then apply it to your project. One very important thing to remember about oxalic acid is that if you have let's say a dresser top that is stained, you're going to want to apply it to the entire dresser top, not just the stain itself. If you only apply it to the stain is the only part that's going to lighten, and it's going to end up looking kind of funny. So I'm going to bring this outside to dry for a little bit, and as I knock everything over in my path, I'm going to let the oxalic acid completely dry in the sun, and then I'm going to wheel it back inside and give it a nice wiping with water. And you're going to want to rinse this with water at least 2 to 3 times just to make sure that all those oxalic acid crystals are completely gone. It helps to turn your towel over every now and then just to get a clean spot. And then once that's completely rinsed, I'm going to bring it back out in the sun to completely dry again. And like I said in the intro, these drawers were really dirty. They were full of cobwebs and a lot of dust, so I'm just giving them a pretty good vacuuming and cleaning. And moving on to some repairs here. The drawer bottoms are a beautiful mahogany veneer, but some of them are peeling up, so I'm going to add a little bit of glue down inside that crack, working it in with my finger, making sure that I'm really getting that glue down underneath there, because I really don't want these beautiful mahogany drawer veneers to pop back up again. And once I'm finally satisfied with how much glue I've put in there, I'm going to be taking these wood blocks with some tape on them so they don't get glued to the bottom of my drawer, and just put some heavy weight on them. I'm using 2 cans of stripper and something else. And I'm just going to repeat that process for the other drawer. So as those 2 drawers dry, I'm just going to be working on all the other drawers, and I'm going to be sanding every square inch of these drawers down to get them ready for the finish. And these drawers weren't in terrible shape at all. They were actually pretty decent. They just needed a light sanding. I'm just pulling out all these nails that were hammered into the dovetail joints. I still just don't understand why people do that. And there was a stain in this drawer that I just could not get out with sanding, and I didn't want to sand too far because this is all veneer. So I'm just going to use some oxalic acid to see maybe if that'll help. And now it's time for some wood filler. There were a ton of scratches and gouges on this thing, so I'm going to have a little bit of color work to do with Mohawk's brush tip markers later on. And here I'm just using the pencil trick again to lightly mark up the wood. And as I sand over these lines and they disappear, I'm going to know I've sanded just enough. This trick is really good for veneer because with veneer you want to give it a good sanding, but you don't want to sand through. So it'll help you sand just enough without over sanding. And like I said before, I'm going to be sanding the sides and the trim in the front to 320, and the draw faces and the top I'm actually going to be sanding to 1000 grit. So I have quite a bit of sanding to do. Just working my way up all the way to that 1000 grit. I'm going to apply some Odie's Safer Solvent to give the wood a really good cleaning in between grits. And this is also going to give you a really nice look at what this wood is going to look like with a clear coat over it. And oh my goodness, this mahogany is so nice. And now my glue in the drawers have completely dried, so I'm going to go in with some wood filler and just seal up those gaps that are in between the veneer sheets. And while that's drying, I'm just going to do a couple small repairs here on the dovetails. I don't want to saturate the dovetails with glue. I just want to put a little bead in between each dovetail and just clamp it up. I also have to fix a couple corners on some of the drawers that have chipped. And I could chisel out a small section and splice in a little block of wood, but I'm actually going to be using Quickwood wood epoxy because I have no real mahogany. And that's the type of wood I really would have liked to have used. Quickwood is a two-part wood epoxy, and you can see there's an outer layer and an inner layer here. And you're just going to break off as much as you'd like to use and just knead it in between your fingers until it's one solid color, and just form it into whatever shape that you're trying to make. In this case, I'm going to be trying to replicate the corners. And while I'm waiting for that to dry, after a ton of sanding, I'm finally getting up to 1000 grit. And one thing to really remember here, and I alluded to it before, but I'll go into more detail now. Whenever you're sanding to a very high grit, and I mean anything above 320, you're basically polishing the wood at that point. You're no longer taking material off. And if your surface isn't clean and you have any pieces of dust or dirt or maybe even sandpaper grit that fell off, if you sand over that with a high grit, number one, your sandpaper isn't going to perform its best. And number two, you're basically going to be dragging those pieces along and scratching the wood as you go. So it's very important that you have a clean surface. Alright, now my wood filler is dry and I'm just going to begin sanding it. And same thing with my Quickwood. I'm just going to begin sanding it down to shape. it's time to sand the drawers to 1000 grit. And as usual, I'm going to be using Odie's oil for my finish. Odie's oil is a tung oil based hard wax oil finish, and it's one of my favorite finishes to use. I just find that it brings out the natural clarity and beauty of the wood. It's also completely natural and non-toxic, which is one of my favorite parts because you can put it on without gloves. You just want to mix it up really good and then start applying. And I use a Merkur Milan pad to apply it. And remember, a little goes a very long way, so you don't want to use a lot of this stuff. And inside the drawers, instead of using like shellac or Howard Feeden wax, I'm just going to be using Odie's Super Duper Everlasting oil, which has a much thinner consistency and is a little bit easier to apply than the universal oil. And you could see how that beautiful mahogany veneer just completely pops. And as usual, once the Odie's has sat for about an hour to 2 hours, you want to come in and buff it all off. And the little trick that I learned is if you take your fingers and drag it across the surface and it leaves trails or streak marks, then you want to keep buffing. You got to buff until all of that oil is gone. these 2 burn marks that I could not get out, and it was driving me a little crazy, so I went back in and I just sanded them out. But as you can guess, it's going to leave a little bit of a divot in the wood, so I'm just going to end up putting some wood filler there and work on matching the colors later on. And this is another thing I love about Odie's oil, because I'm sanding into my finish, and all I'm going to have to do is just apply more Odie's oil over this area, and it'll be completely fine. But if this was any other film finish, it would be really hard. So I let that wood filler sit for a couple hours to dry. And as you probably guessed, now I have to start at 180 again and work my way all the way back up to 1000 grit. And after I do that, I'm going to reapply the Odie's oil, and it'll blend right in to be a seamless finish. And of course, buffing all of that off after about an hour. Alright, just a couple more steps to go until the end. Now I'm just using Mohawk's brush tip graining markers to do some color correction on these drawer corners. And I know it's not going to be perfect, but I'm just trying to get a close enough color match on the drawers. And I'm just using a bunch of different colors just to mix and match and try to get a close enough color. And I'm definitely no artist, but I think it's coming out pretty good. And for the big burn mark spot on the top of the piece, I'm going to be using Mohawk's Blend All sticks, because I think it's going to give a little bit of a better color match. Now I have to recreate these draw guides, and I found one of them, but I'm still missing the other, so I have to recreate this, and it's such a weird shape too. You can see the curves and the weird angles, and it's not as simple as just buying a new one, because there's going to be a height difference if I do that. You got to remember, this piece is decades and decades old, so I'm going to be recreating my own. And basically what I'm doing here is I'm just taking this piece of metal that I'm going to be using almost like a rebar for the glide, that's going to act as a reinforcement for when I pour the fiberglass resin into the mold. And this fiberglass resin dries extremely hard, so there's no worries about strength. And what I'm doing here is just mixing together this 2-part putty mix that I'm going to be using to make the mold, rolling it into a little bit of a sausage, and I'm going to be pressing my guide down into it and forming the sides, making sure that I don't leave any air pockets. And now I'm just popping it out of the mold, and I'm going to add the fiberglass resin. And now with the fiberglass resin, you have to put 10 drops of the liquid hardener per ounce. So I had to put 110 drops. Just giving it a really good mix and pouring it in the mold. And with this stuff, you have about an 8 to 12 minute window until it activates. And just as it was starting to activate, I placed in that metal rod for stability and let it cure. And just like that, it's done. It may have been 2 seconds for you, but it was about 3 hours for me. And it actually came out really good. The only thing that needed to be done was create a little bit of a deeper channel in the center of it, because the mold didn't really capture the full depth of the center. And also we need to route this edge right here, because it came out pretty rough and just needed a bit of cleaning up. And you can see right here what I was talking about, that center channel just needs a little bit of deepening. And finally, my feet came in the mail, so it's time to install those. And here I'm just unscrewing the previous feet, and they were pretty broken and mangled, and they were almost non-existent. I had a little bit of trouble unscrewing them too, because those screws were just rusted completely through. But I got them off, and I realized that they were also glued on, which made it a little bit harder, but I got a chisel and got them off pretty easily. And then after they were finally off, I just came in with my Surf Prep sander and gave it a nice sanding to make sure it was all level. And then I took my feet and just drilled some pilot holes for the screws. And then just applied some glue to the base and the bottom of my feet, getting glue almost everywhere. And then just glued and screwed them on. Now these feet are made of alder wood, which is a light colored wood when the finish is applied. So I need to stain them because it's not going to match the mahogany if I just leave them as they are. So I just put on a foam pad and gave them a quick sanding. And luckily I had a leftover batch of stain that I used, which matched the mahogany actually pretty well. I'm pretty happy with it. So I applied the stain and then wiped it off. And I think it came out pretty good. I think it was a pretty close color match to some of the tones in the mahogany. But let me know what you think. And finally, the last step is just adding the new hardware. And I don't have footage of it, but I did replace those boards and the back panel from the beginning of the video. I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching this video. I absolutely love the fact that I can make these videos and bring everybody along for the ride. If you like this kind of content, feel free to like and subscribe. I'm going to try to put out a video a week, but we'll see what happens. But anyway, enjoy the reveal.